It was supposed to be a fun getaway, something that would be a good time for me and a couple of friends, a chance to get away from the stress of everyday life. A safari lodge near Apakapi, South Africa. It was an expensive trip, but everyone else seemed excited about it, so I tagged along, figuring I'd at least have a good time. It wasn't the first time I'd gone camping, but this place had a different vibe. It had fences, gates, the kind of setup that made it feel a little more like an enclosure than a wild adventure. The kind of place where you could sit back and enjoy the safari experience in a more controlled environment. The drive up had been smooth, and the place itself was gorgeous. The lodge sat nestled on the edge of a vast, open stretch of land, surrounded by wild bush and thick trees. I could tell it was a special place. The staff didn't exactly say much about safety or precautions. Most people just walked in and made themselves at home. The vibe was laid back, maybe a little too laid back. No mention of how dangerous the surrounding area could be. It all felt a little too easy. That night, the party kicked off. Drinks were passed around, and the mood was light. I wasn't usually the type to get overly drunk, but with the alcohol flowing freely and the night feeling like it was just meant to be spent getting wasted under the stars, I didn't think twice about pouring myself a few extra shots. I wasn't planning on going far, just wanted to wander off for a bit, get some fresh air, enjoy the starry night. I'd had a few drinks, and the stars above were bright, but the cool air made me feel clearer than I'd expected. There were no city lights, nothing to drown out the sounds of the night. I decided to walk a bit further away from the lodges, just to get some solitude. The grass underfoot was soft, and the sound of crickets filled the air. The night felt endless. I didn't think about it, didn't feel any real danger, just wanted to get away from the noise and the people. As I walked, the silence enveloped me. The faint rustling of leaves was the only thing I could hear besides my own footsteps. The moon was almost full, its light washing over the land, but it wasn't enough to make things feel safe. In fact, the further I went, the darker it seemed to get, like the shadows of the trees and bushes were swallowing up the light. I knew the fences were still there, but I felt like I was on the edge of something, an unknown stretch of wilderness. Maybe I went further than I intended. I wasn't really keeping track of time. I just stood there for a while, staring at the stars, not thinking much of anything at all. It was peaceful, but the deeper I went into the darkness, the more I realized how isolated I really was. That was when I heard something. It wasn't a sound I could identify at first, just the faintest rustle. At first, I thought it was the wind, maybe an animal nearby, but then I heard it again, a deeper, more distinct sound this time. I froze. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It didn't sound like the usual animals you'd expect in a place like this, not a bird or a rodent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a sinking feeling hit my stomach. I turned slowly, trying not to make a sound. The air around me seemed to shift, a heavy weight pressing in on me, and that's when I saw them. There, just beyond the reach of the moonlight, I could make out a shape. It wasn't just one shape, it was a whole pack of them. Hyenas. A pack of at least 5, maybe more, just standing there in the dark. They were barely visible, but their eyes glowed faintly, and even in the shadows, I could see the outline of their bodies. They were big, bigger than I expected. The stories you hear about hyenas, how they're scavengers, how they hunt in packs, don't really do them justice until you see them with your own eyes. They weren't pretty. They weren't cute. They looked like something straight out of a nightmare. The first thing that hit me was the sound. The low, grating laugh that they're known for. It echoed in the stillness of the night, sending a shiver through my entire body. I should have known right then that I was in serious trouble. But I didn't move. I stood there frozen, staring at them, unable to process the situation. They were watching me, not with the curiosity of some wild animal, but with something colder, something more calculating. In that moment, I knew they weren't just standing there. They were waiting for something, I don't even know how I started moving, but I took a step back, slowly, trying not to make any noise. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't sure how fast they could move, how close they were, but I wasn't about to find out. They started moving with me, staying just out of reach of the light, following my every step, almost as if they were toying with me. I started walking backward, carefully, one step at a time. Felt like my whole body was on high alert. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that if I did, they would be on me in an instant. Hyenas are fast. They don't need much of an excuse to chase something, and I wasn't about to make myself a target. I kept moving backward, trying to stay calm, but it felt like they were getting closer, like the space between us was closing in. The darkness around me seemed to grow thicker, heavier, as if the night itself was closing in. The glow from the lodge behind me was barely visible now, just a faint outline in the distance. I was far enough from the safety of the lodge that I couldn't count on anyone hearing me if I screamed. The thought made my chest tighten. I was around 100 meters away from the lodge when I realized I couldn't keep backing up without turning. My foot hit a rock, and I stumbled just for a second. That was all it took. The hyenas lunged forward, their eyes flashing in the dim light. I didn't know how close they were, but I could feel their presence like a physical weight creeping up on me. I snapped into action. Without thinking, I turned and ran. I knew it was a mistake the moment I did it. The hyenas didn't hesitate. They were on me faster than I could have imagined, their feet pounding the ground as they gave chase. My heart was racing, and I could hear the sound of their laughter, that grating, eerie sound, following me in the dark. I didn't dare look back. I ran as fast as I could, hearing the brush crackle beneath their paws, feeling the brush of air as they got closer. The distance between us felt like it was closing in too quickly. Couldn't breathe. The adrenaline pumping through my veins was the only thing keeping me moving. I had no idea where the lodge was in relation to where I was. All I knew was that I had to get away from them. I pushed myself harder, faster, and after what felt like an eternity, I finally saw the lights from the lodge again. I could see the faint outline of the fence in the distance, and the sight filled me with a rush of relief. I wasn't far. I just had to keep running. I pushed through the final stretch, every step a blur. As I approached the fence, I turned quickly and dove through the open gate. The hyenas stopped just outside, pacing back and forth, but they didn't follow any further. I didn't stop to look back. I just ran into the safety of the lodge, my chest heaving, my mind racing. The staff inside must have noticed something was wrong, but by the time I reached the door, I didn't care about anything else. I was safe. The hyenas were still out there, but I was inside. That was all that mattered. The rest of the night passed in a blur of adrenaline and panic, but by morning, the fear had subsided, and the reality of what happened set in. I couldn't believe I had let myself get that far out of sight, that far into danger. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't need to. They wouldn't understand how close I had come to not making it back. It wasn't until the next day that I learned that the lodge was only partially fenced in. Outside the fence, the hyenas roamed freely. The staff had warned us about it, but they didn't make it clear just how real the danger was. They never talked about the risks, and that was something I would never forget. I was 19, and it felt like the world was mine. It was that golden time of life when the future seemed endless, and every little adventure felt like a chapter in some epic story. My buddy, James, and I had driven up to the mountains of North Carolina, ready for a weekend of hiking, camping, and forgetting about the grind of our part-time jobs. His grandparents had a small camper set up in a nearby site at the base of a mountain, but we weren't about to hang around there. No, we wanted real adventure, and that meant finding our own spot deep in the woods. We followed a stream uphill for what must have been 2 or 3 miles. The terrain wasn't easy. Lots of loose rocks, overgrown roots, and sections of the stream where we had to step carefully to keep from slipping. But eventually, we found the perfect spot. A huge flat rock overlooking the stream with enough cover from the trees above to keep us dry if it rained. We spent the afternoon setting up a lean-to shelter against the rock, gathering firewood, and even managing to catch a couple of fish from the stream for dinner. By the time night fell, everything felt perfect. The woods were alive with the sounds of insects and distant owls, and the stars above seemed brighter than I'd ever seen them. We didn't bring a tent, just a couple of sleeping bags, so we laid them out under the lean-to. James was out cold in no time, snoring softly in his bag, his head propped up on his backpack. I stayed awake for a while, staring up at the canopy of leaves and the occasional glimpse of stars. The fire had died down to glowing coals, and the night felt almost oppressively dark. I've camped before, but this was something else. There were no other people for miles, no faint hum of traffic in the background, just pure silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the trickling of water nearby. It must have been a little after midnight when I saw it. At first, it was just a faint flicker in the distance, barely noticeable through the trees. I squinted, trying to make it out, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I figured maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. The darkness out there can mess with your head if you let it. But then, a few minutes later, I saw it again. This time, it lingered a bit longer. It was definitely a light, faint but clear, and in almost the exact same spot. I tried to make sense of it. My first thought was that we might have hiked closer to a road than we realized, and maybe I was seeing headlights through the trees. But the light didn't act like headlights. It didn't move in a straight line or seem consistent. It was erratic, like someone walking with a flashlight, and it had this odd, faint glow to it that didn't seem natural. My stomach tightened as I kept watching, half expecting it to disappear again. But instead, it did something that made my heart skip a beat. It flipped, not like a person turning with a flashlight, but like it spun in the air, twisting unnaturally before vanishing again. At that moment, my gut told me something wasn't right. My logical brain wanted to believe it was just another camper, someone like us out exploring. But another part of me, the part that was hyper-aware of how isolated we were, felt a growing sense of unease. James was still snoring softly behind me, oblivious to the whole thing. I didn't want to wake him just yet. Instead, I kept my eyes locked on the spot where I'd last seen the light, hoping it wouldn't come back. But it did. This time, it wasn't off in the distance. It was at my feet. I froze. It was a small orb, maybe the size of a golf ball, and it was glowing with this perfect, steady white light. It wasn't bright enough to light up its surroundings, but it was undeniably there. It moved slowly and silently, gliding in a straight line from the base of our shelter up toward my head. My chest felt tight, and I realized I was holding my breath, too scared to move or even blink. The way it moved was unsettling. It was too smooth, too deliberate, like it was scanning me or something. When it finally disappeared over my shoulder, I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. For a long time, I just sat there, frozen in place, staring out into the darkness. I couldn't bring myself to look behind me, too afraid of what I might see. My mind was racing, trying to come up with an explanation that made sense. Fireflies? Maybe, but this wasn't green or flickering. And it wasn't an animal. There was no sound, no rustling of leaves, nothing. Minutes passed, and I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then, just as I was starting to convince myself it was nothing, the light reappeared, this time a little farther away, back where I'd first seen it. But now it didn't flicker or disappear. It stayed on, hovering and moving in slow, erratic patterns through the trees. That's when I finally nudged James awake. He groaned and shifted in his sleeping bag, but when he saw the look on my face, He sat up quickly. I whispered for him to stay quiet and pointed out into the woods. It didn't take him long to spot the light. I felt him tense up behind me, his breathing suddenly shallow. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. "I don't know," I muttered back, barely able to get the words out. For a while, we just sat there, watching in silence as the light floated through the trees. Then James noticed something I hadn't. Up the hill, farther into the woods, there were two more lights. They were fainter but moving in the same strange, deliberate way. We were completely surrounded by darkness except for those eerie, glowing orbs. Neither of us said another word. What could we say? We didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched as the lights continued their slow, deliberate dance through the trees. I kept expecting something to happen. Maybe the lights would come closer, or some hidden figure would emerge from the woods, but nothing did. They just hovered there, as if they were waiting for something. The hours dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. I don't think I've ever felt so vulnerable in my life, lying there under that lean-to with no way to defend myself if something, or someone, decided to come at us. James stayed awake with me the whole time, both of us too scared to even whisper. We just sat there, stiff as boards, watching those lights until the first faint hints of dawn started to break through the trees. As the sun rose, the lights slowly faded. They didn't vanish all at once, just grew dimmer and dimmer until they were gone, swallowed up by the growing daylight. Even after they disappeared, James and I didn't move for a long time. When we finally did, it was only to pack up our gear as quickly as we could. Neither of us said much as we hiked back down the stream to his grandparents' campsite. What was there to say? We spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of what we'd seen, but nothing added up. There were no trails nearby, no signs of other campers or hikers, and no logical explanation for those lights. Even now, years later, I still don't know what they were. Maybe it was some kind of natural phenomenon, something we don't fully understand. Or maybe it was just a trick of the mind, brought on by exhaustion and the isolation of the woods. Whatever it was, I've never gone camping that deep in the mountains again. Sometimes, late at night, I think about those lights and wonder what would have happened if we tried to follow them, or if they decided to come closer. I guess I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. I never thought I'd find myself camping in the crownlands of Muskoka. It was a beautiful summer night, and the forest was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind and the soft crackling of the campfire. The firelight danced on the faces of the trees, and the night sky above was a patchwork of stars, clear and pristine. It was one of those nights where you could feel the peace of the outdoors seep into your bones. I was just lying back on a blanket, looking up at the sky, letting the quiet envelop me. I had been out in the woods before, but never like this, and certainly never this far into Muskoka's crownlands. It was always peaceful here, away from the chaos of city life. My friend and I had joked about how nice it was to escape the noise, though we both knew that there was something eerie about how still and silent everything could be. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, the world felt different, strange in a way I couldn't quite explain. As I lay there, my eyes focused on the endless expanse above me, I couldn't help but admire how many stars there were. I had always loved the night sky, but this felt different. I hadn't seen a night this clear in a long time. The stars were bright and scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. That's when I saw it. A small white, far above, near the edge of the horizon. It was the kind of thing you'd normally brush off, thinking it was just another star. But as I watched it, something about it didn't sit right. It started moving, slowly at first, just drifting through the sky, but it picked up speed. I froze, staring at it. My first thought was that it might be a shooting star, though it didn't have the usual tail. This dot was too high up, and it was moving in a straight line. I laughed it off, trying to ease my own unease. I grabbed my flashlight from beside me and flashed it up at the dot, joking to my friend, "Aliens, right?" I wasn't actually scared. It was probably just a satellite or some other explanation that didn't quite fit. But at that moment, I was more caught up in the fun of it all. But then, the dot did something I never expected. It took a sharp right turn, an impossible sudden movement that no plane, bird, or satellite could make. It wasn't just a gradual curve either. The turn was so abrupt, so precise, that I could hardly believe my eyes. My heart skipped a beat as the dot faded into the sky, vanishing without a trace. It wasn't like a star flickering out. It just disappeared. The whole thing lasted maybe a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. My friend, who had been distracted with something else, looked over at me, confused by my sudden quiet. I don't know what I was expecting, but I felt an intense unease, like something I couldn't quite understand had just occurred. The night felt heavier all of a sudden, and even the rustling trees seemed to have gone still. I didn't want to say anything at first, unsure if I'd imagined it, but it felt real, very real. I felt a chill creep up my spine, and it wasn't just from the night air. Something about that sharp turn, the way it vanished, it didn't sit right. The campfire crackled, and I tried to shrug it off. Maybe I had just seen a satellite moving across the sky or some weird atmospheric thing. Still, there was something about the way that dot moved, how it changed direction in a way nothing should have been able to do, that gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had witnessed was not something ordinary. A few days later, after we left the Crownlands and returned home, the memory of that moment kept creeping back into my mind. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like the image of that tiny, moving dot was burned into my brain. I tried to convince myself it was just an optical illusion or something explainable, but I kept doubting myself. It didn't make sense. Then, a week or so later, I stumbled upon a video while scrolling through my news feed. It was a documentary-style interview with a Canadian government official, someone who had held a high-ranking position and had been deeply involved in the study of national security. The video described an event that sounded eerily familiar. The official spoke about a strange sighting he had experienced years ago while camping in Muskoka, in the very same Crownlands where I had been. He described exactly what I had seen. A small white in the sky, moving as though it were a star, until it suddenly changed direction and vanished into the atmosphere. It was such a specific detail, down to the sharp right turn, that I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The official went on to say that after the sighting, he had spent months trying to rationalize it. But the more he looked into it, the more he found similar reports. People all over the world, in isolated places like Muskoka, were witnessing the same strange phenomenon. But what really shook me was what happened next. The official, after years of trying to make sense of what he'd seen, had stepped down from his position. He devoted the rest of his career to researching extraterrestrial anomalies, becoming a vocal advocate for the study of the unknown. He couldn't explain what he saw, but he knew it was something beyond anything we understood. His words were chilling, as though he had been forever changed by the experience. I had never heard anything like it before. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I listened to the official describe the exact same thing I had seen in the sky above Muskoka. It was the strangest feeling, knowing that what I had witnessed wasn't some freak accident or a product of my imagination. There was something out there, something far beyond what we understood. After watching the video, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was now a part of something bigger. I had been a witness to the same strange event that had so deeply affected that government official. Muskoka's Crownlands, with their beauty and isolation, had become a place where reality itself seemed to bend. Something was in the sky above those woods, something far beyond our world, and it was impossible to ignore the truth of what we had both seen. I still don't know what it was, but I'm certain of one thing. I'm not the only one who's seen it. Whether it was a military experiment, something extraterrestrial, or simply an unexplained phenomenon, I don't know. But I know what I saw, and I know that I'm not crazy. The memories of that night are etched in my mind, forever linked to the quiet darkness of Muskoka. The night sky will never look the same to me again. And every time I glance up at the stars, I can't help but wonder if they're watching too. My cousins and I used to camp a lot, no matter the season. Fall was one of our favorite times, and that year was no different. The cool air, the absence of bugs, and the clear skies made it perfect. We had a particular spot we liked, a little ridge that formed a sort of natural bowl. It was cozy, private, and perfect for a fire. We'd been there dozens of times, so it felt like home in the woods. The spot was about a mile hike from where we parked. It wasn't a hard hike, but the thick forest made it feel isolated. That was part of the charm for us, being so far removed from everything. No cell service, no distractions, just us and nature. We loaded up our gear and started the hike in the late afternoon, figuring we'd get there with plenty of daylight left to set up camp. The woods were dense but familiar. The trees were tall and close together, their leaves mostly fallen, covering the ground in a patchwork of gold and brown. The air smelled earthy, damp, and crisp. It wasn't long before we reached the ridge. The spot looked the same as it always did, the surrounding hills rising just high enough to make you feel enclosed, like you were in your own little world. We quickly set up camp, 3 tents in a loose semicircle around the fire pit. My cousins, more experienced outdoorsmen than I was, handled most of the work. They strung up a tarp, gathered wood, and got the fire going while I helped where I could. By the time the sun started setting, we were settled in. The fire crackled and sent sparks into the dimming sky, casting long shadows on the ridge walls. Night fell fast in the woods. The temperature dropped sharply, and we all bundled up, grateful for the heat of the fire. We sat around it, passing a flask and laughing as the stars began to appear. Someone brought some weed, and we passed that around too, the smoke mixing with the smell of burning wood. It felt like every other camping trip we'd had, comfortable, familiar, and fun. It must have been around midnight when we first heard the coyotes. Their yips and howls carried through the still air, echoing off the ridges. At first, they were far away, just background noise to our conversations. We were used to hearing coyotes out here. They were part of the landscape. None of us thought much of it. But after a while, the howls grew louder, closer. It wasn't just 1 or 2 coyotes. It sounded like an entire pack. They called back and forth across the ridges, a strange, chaotic rhythm that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. One of my cousins, the most experienced outdoorsman among us, paused mid-laugh and tilted his head, listening. "Sounds like a big group tonight," he said quietly, his voice losing its usual carefree tone. The rest of us fell silent, ears straining. A few minutes later, we heard something else, rustling. It came from the ridge above us, faint at first, like the wind stirring leaves. But it wasn't the wind. The sound was deliberate, rhythmic, and too heavy for small animals. We exchanged uneasy glances, the firelight casting flickering shadows across our faces. The howls started up again, closer this time, and more frantic. It was as if the coyotes were riling themselves up, growing excited and restless. The rustling above us intensified, and the uneasy feeling in my gut turned into a knot. My cousins stopped talking altogether, their faces tense. One of them reached behind him, pulling out a shotgun and a Big Mag light. He clicked the light on, the beam cutting through the darkness as he stood and walked to the edge of the firelight. He aimed the light toward the ridge, and that's when we saw them. Dozens of them, glowing in the beam of the flashlight. They were scattered across the ridge, unmoving, watching us. The light darted around, revealing more and more pairs of eyes until it felt like the entire ridge was alive with them. "Jesus!" someone muttered under their breath. The light swept around the campsite, and more eyes appeared. They weren't just on the ridge above us, they were everywhere, encircling us. My cousin raised the shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. The blast echoed through the trees, but the eyes didn't budge. Another shot. Nothing. The coyotes didn't flinch, didn't retreat. They just watched. We huddled closer to the fire, our earlier laughter and jokes now a distant memory. The fire felt like our only protection, its light and heat keeping the coyotes at bay. But they were close, too close. You could hear their movement just beyond the firelight, the soft crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot. Every so often, one would let out a low growl or a short, sharp bark. It was maddening. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. None of us dared to sleep. We took shifts watching the fire, making sure it never died down. Every time the flames flickered or dimmed, the coyotes seemed to creep closer, their eyes reflecting the light like tiny mirrors. My cousin with the shotgun kept it ready, his finger never far from the trigger. At one point, I swear I saw one of the coyotes step into the edge of the firelight, its form low and sleek, its yellow eyes locked on us. It was only there for a moment before retreating, but the sight sent a cold wave of fear through me. These weren't just scavengers. They were hunters, and we were their prey. The hours crawled by. The fire popped and crackled, the only sound apart from the occasional rustle or howl. My cousins and I didn't speak, our silence heavy with fear. Every now and then, one of us would scan the darkness with the mag light, but the eyes were always there, waiting. Finally, just before dawn, the rustling stopped. The howls faded into the distance. When my cousin shone the light around one last time, the eyes were gone. There wasn't a single sound, not even the usual chirping of birds or rustling of leaves. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We didn't stick around to find out why. As soon as the first light of day broke through the trees, we packed up and left, our movements hurried and silent. The hike back to the car felt longer than usual, every sound in the woods making us jump. When we finally reached the car and loaded up, none of us spoke until we were miles away. To this day, I don't know why the coyotes acted the way they did that night. Maybe it was a territorial thing. Maybe they were just curious. But the way they surrounded us, the way they watched and waited, it felt deliberate, predatory. I've been camping plenty of times since, but I've never gone back to that ridge. Some things aren't worth tempting twice. It was a Tuesday in the middle of fall 2 years ago, and for once I had the day off work. Tuesdays weren't typically days I had off, so it felt strange from the start, almost like skipping class in high school, an unexpected freedom but with a weird undercurrent of unease. Instead of lounging at home, I decided to head to the Luss Hills, one of my favorite hiking spots. It was something I did often to clear my head and get away from the usual grind. The hills were a peaceful escape, with their rolling terrain and dense patches of trees. I loved the way the light filtered through the fall leaves, and the crisp air always made me feel more alive. I packed light that day, a small backpack with some water, a protein bar, and my usual hiking essentials. The weather was perfect, cool but not cold, with a light breeze rustling the already fallen leaves on the ground. I figured it would be a relaxing day to just wander and get lost in my thoughts. The trailhead was quiet when I arrived. My car was the only one in the gravel parking lot, which wasn't unusual for a weekday. Most people were probably at work or school, and I liked it that way. I'd always preferred the solitude of solo hiking over crowded trails. There was something meditative about being alone in nature, where the only sounds were the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. As I started my hike, the trail wound through the trees, the ground covered in a thick blanket of leaves. The Luss Hills were known for their unique terrain, sharp ridges and narrow valleys that made you feel like you were deep in some ancient, untouched forest. It was easy to get lost, but I wasn't worried. I knew the area pretty well and always carried my phone with GPS just in case. The morning passed uneventfully. I stopped a few times to take pictures of the scenery, the way the sunlight hit the golden leaves, the way the hills rolled into the distance like waves frozen in time. I didn't see a single person the entire time, which was odd but not alarming. The silence was comforting in a way, and I let my mind wander as I hiked deeper into the hills. After a couple of hours, I reached a point where the trail became less defined. The ground was uneven, covered in leaves that hid roots, rocks, and other tripping hazards. I slowed down, being careful with my steps, but I was distracted by the view ahead. The trees opened up slightly, revealing a ridge that looked out over the valley. It was the kind of spot you'd find in a nature magazine, and I decided to head there for a better view. That's when it happened. My foot caught on something, a branch or a root hidden under the thick layer of leaves. I stumbled forward, my balance completely gone, and before I could catch myself, I was falling. Time seemed to slow as I hit the ground face first, the impact knocking the wind out of me. The smell of damp earth filled my nose, and for a moment, I just lay there, stunned. And then I heard it. Laughter. It wasn't my laugh, nor was it the laugh of a single person. It was a group, 3, maybe 5 distinct voices. They sounded young, like children. The laughter was high-pitched and carefree, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't joyous laughter. It felt mocking. My heart started pounding as I pushed myself up, scanning the area around me. The sound seemed to have come from just a few feet away, but when I looked, there was no one there, not a single soul. The forest was empty, just as it had been all morning. The laughter stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. I stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. My rational mind struggled to make sense of it. Maybe it was an echo? Maybe someone was out here, and I just hadn't noticed them? But that didn't explain how they had gotten so close without me hearing their footsteps on the leaves. I brushed myself off and adjusted my backpack, forcing myself to move. The unease settled deep in my chest, growing with each step. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, a trick of the wind, my imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was the kind of feeling you get when you know you're being watched. The hike back felt like it took twice as long as the hike in. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch, made me flinch. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following me, but there was never anything there. The forest seemed quieter now, the usual sounds of birds and insects eerily absent. I picked up my pace, practically power walking down the trail. My mind raced with thoughts, each one more paranoid than the last. Maybe it was a group of kids playing a prank? But who would let their kids wander this deep into the woods? And why would they just vanish? The laughter had been so close, too close for it to have been random strangers who just happened to pass by. As I walked, I noticed things I hadn't on the way in. A broken branch here, a patch of disturbed leaves there. Small signs that someone or something had been through the area recently. Could have been animals, but in my heightened state of paranoia, every little detail felt like a clue, like evidence that I wasn't as alone as I thought. My legs burned from the constant uphill and downhill terrain, but I didn't dare slow down. I wanted needed to get back to my car and out of these woods. The sun was lower in the sky now, the shadows stretching longer and darker with each passing minute. By the time I reached the trailhead, my nerves were shot. My car was still the only one in the lot, a small but reassuring sight. I climbed in, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment, catching my breath. The forest seemed normal again from the safety of my car, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been off. As I drove away, I kept replaying the moment of the fall in my head, trying to rationalize what I'd heard. Maybe I'd hit my head and imagined it, but I hadn't felt any pain, and the laughter had been so clear, so vivid. To this day, I don't have an explanation for what happened. I haven't been back to the Luss Hills since. Whenever I think about hiking again, I feel that same unease creeping in, a reminder of that strange fall day. It's not the kind of thing you forget. Maybe it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't. When I was about 13, I went on a camping trip with my Boy Scout troop. It was one of those trips I always dreaded. At that age, I was skittish about a lot of things, but my fear of the dark was the worst. The way the woods turned into a different world at night, it always unsettled me. Shadows became monsters, rustling leaves sounded like footsteps, and every distant crackle felt like someone or something was watching. Despite my fears, I didn't want to seem weak in front of the other boys. I tried to put on a brave face, but inside, I was always on edge when the sun went down. This particular trip took us deep into the woods of central Ohio. It was a remote spot, far from any towns or roads. Perfect for camping, the adults said. Perfect for my nerves to unravel, I thought. The days were manageable, filled with hikes, cooking lessons, and the usual scout activities. But as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, the familiar unease crept in. The night swallowed everything, leaving us surrounded by thick darkness and the occasional crackle of the campfire. The first couple of nights passed without incident. I stayed close to the fire as long as I could before retreating to the safety of my tent. My tent mate, Jason, was the kind of kid who could sleep through anything. I envied him for it. While he snored away, I lay awake most nights, listening to the forest and convincing myself that every little noise was harmless. But on the third night, something happened that I'll never forget. It was around midnight when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what had roused me. I thought maybe it was just my nerves or the wind rattling the tent. Jason was still sound asleep, his breathing deep and steady. I tried to relax, but something felt off. The air was heavy, and the usual night sounds, crickets, distant owls, seemed muted. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural roar cut through the silence. My heart stopped. It wasn't loud, but it was close enough to make the hair on my arms stand on end. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, but then it came again, louder this time. A deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a bear, that much I knew. I'd heard recordings of bear growls during safety talks, and this was different. Deeper, more predatory. The first thing that came to mind was a lion or a tiger, but that was ridiculous. We were in Ohio, for crying out loud. There were no lions or tigers here, only in zoos or faraway jungles. My rational brain tried to dismiss it as a trick of the wind or maybe a distant engine. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The sound was alive, and it was close. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed. My breathing was shallow, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The roar came again, followed by a series of shorter, chuffing sounds. It was moving, but I couldn't tell which direction. Was it coming toward us? My mind raced with possibilities. Could it be some kind of escaped animal? A prank? But who would bring something like that out here? I wanted to wake Jason, but I couldn't move. It felt like the smallest noise or motion would draw attention to our tent. Instead, I lay there, staring at the nylon ceiling, trying to will myself invisible. The roar came again, louder this time, and I swore I could feel it in my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed for it to stop. For what felt like an eternity, I listened to the sounds of this unseen creature. The growls would rise and fall, sometimes fading into the distance, only to return moments later. I couldn't tell how many there were. Was it one animal circling our camp, or were there several? I didn't dare peek outside to find out. Eventually, the noises began to fade. Whether the animal moved on or I was simply too exhausted to notice anymore, I don't know. Somehow, despite the adrenaline coursing through my body, I drifted into a restless sleep. When I woke up the next morning, sunlight streamed into the tent, and everything felt normal again. Jason was already up, rummaging through his pack. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing, but the memory of those roars was too vivid to be a dream. I stumbled out of the tent and found the rest of the troop gathered around the fire, eating breakfast. The mood was light, and no one seemed to have heard anything unusual. I hesitated to bring it up. What if they thought I was just being paranoid? But the thought of keeping it to myself felt even worse. After breakfast, I approached our scoutmaster, Mr. Fields. He was a tall, serious man with a no-nonsense attitude, but he had a way of making you feel safe. I told him about the sounds I'd heard and tried to describe them as best I could. To my surprise, he didn't laugh or brush me off. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "I think I know what you heard," he said. "There's a wildlife refuge about a mile from here. They've got lions, tigers, and other exotic animals. Sometimes, when the wind's just right, you can hear them at night." I stared at him, stunned. A wildlife refuge? That close? It explained the sounds, but it didn't make me feel any better. The idea that such dangerous animals were so close to our campsite was unsettling, even if they were supposedly secure. I tried to put it out of my mind for the rest of the trip, but the memory lingered. The sounds, the fear, they stayed with me long after we packed up and returned home. Years later, I heard about the man who owned that refuge. He had let the animals loose before taking his own life. The news was shocking, and it brought all those old memories rushing back. Most of the animals were killed by authorities, unable to be captured safely. I couldn't help but think about that night in the woods and how close we might have been to something far worse. To this day, I'm wary of camping in remote areas. The woods are unpredictable, and you never really know what's out there. Sometimes, it's not the ghosts or monsters you have to fear. It's the things that are all too real. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. My girlfriend and I had been living on the big island of Hawaii for a while, and between work stress and the everyday grind, we needed an escape. We decided on a camping trip to Mackenzie State Park in the Puna district, along the rugged coastline. I had heard murmurs about the park being haunted, but I brushed them off as silly tales. Honestly, I didn't want to spook my girlfriend by bringing it up. It's just a park, I thought. What's the worst that could happen? We planned to stay for 4 nights. I packed up my old truck with the tent, some basic cooking gear, flashlights, a small machete I always kept for clearing brush, and enough food and water to last us. The drive down was peaceful, with the coastal breeze cutting through the warmth of the afternoon. The towering ironwood trees at the park swayed gently, their needles whispering as the wind passed through. The place felt remote, untouched, exactly what we were looking for. We set up our tent on a patch of grass not too far from the parking area, where the forest opened to the coastline. The sound of waves crashing against the sharp lava rock below was constant, a rhythmic background to our little adventure. There were only 2 other people in the park that night, their tent set up on the far side of the clearing, almost out of sight. It felt like we had the whole park to ourselves. That first night, we sat around a small fire we built, talking and listening to the distant sounds of the ocean. The darkness came quickly, as it does in the tropics, and soon the world beyond our little firelight was pitch black. I remember looking up and seeing the stars so clearly, brighter than I'd ever seen them before. We eventually crawled into our tent and drifted off to sleep. It must have been around 2 a.m. when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why, but then I heard it. A rhythmic sound, metallic and sharp, echoing through the night. It sounded like someone was using a pickaxe on the lava rock. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Asterisk, asterisk, there was also this faint groaning, like someone struggling with the weight of their effort. My girlfriend stirred next to me, waking up to the noise too. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice tense. I didn't have an answer. We both sat there, listening, trying to make sense of it. The sound wasn't coming from the direction of the other campers, and it was too deliberate to be an animal. It went on for a few minutes, then stopped as suddenly as it started. The silence afterward was deafening, and the only thing we could hear was our own breathing and the distant waves. Eventually, exhaustion took over and we fell back asleep. The next morning, I walked over to the other campers and casually asked if they'd heard anything strange during the night. They hadn't. I didn't press them further. It felt weird enough bringing it up in the first place. My girlfriend and I shrugged it off as some odd natural phenomenon and carried on with our day. The second night was different. The other campers had left, and it was just the two of us in the park. We cooked dinner as the sun set, the horizon glowing a deep orange before fading into darkness. The wind was stronger that night, rustling the trees and carrying with it the salty scent of the ocean. We turned in early, tired from a day of exploring the area. Around midnight, I woke up again. This time, the sound was unmistakable footsteps. Not just footsteps, but someone sprinting back and forth right outside our tent. My heart was pounding in my chest. I lay there, holding my breath, straining to hear more. The sound was erratic, frantic, as if whoever or whatever it was running at full speed. The footsteps would stop suddenly, then start again, darting in the opposite direction. I grabbed my flashlight and switched it on. The moment the beam cut through the tent's thin fabric, the noise stopped. I waited, holding the flashlight tightly, listening for any sign of movement. Nothing. After a while, I convinced myself it was the wind, or maybe even an animal. I turned the flashlight off and tried to go back to sleep, though my nerves were still on edge. A few hours later, I was jolted awake again, this time by my girlfriend squeezing my arm so hard it hurt. She was trembling, her face inches from mine as she whispered, "Someone's outside the tent." The footsteps had returned, louder now, more deliberate. The sound circled the tent, slow and heavy, like someone pacing. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. Then, without warning, the corner of the tent closest to me was lifted off the ground. The fabric was shaken violently, the entire tent swaying under the force. We both started yelling, shouting at whoever or whatever was out there. The tent dropped suddenly, and the footsteps retreated into the darkness. I didn't wait to see what might happen next. I grabbed the flashlight and machete, unzipped the tent, and stepped outside. The cold night air hit me as I scanned the area with the flashlight. Nothing. There was no sign of anyone, no movement in the trees, no sound except for the wind and the waves. I stood there, turning the flashlight in every direction, my grip tightening on the machete. It was just us, alone in the park. My girlfriend was in full panic mode at this point, urging me to get us out of there. I didn't argue. We quickly packed up the tent, leaving most of our gear inside, and threw it all into the back of the truck. Within minutes, we were driving out of the park, the headlights cutting through the dense forest as we sped away. We didn't stop until we were back home, safe in our own bed. The events of that night played over and over in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even as we drove away. The next day, I talked to a few locals about what had happened. They weren't surprised. One older man told me stories of other campers hearing strange noises, feeling unseen presences, and even seeing shadows darting through the trees at night. He mentioned the park's history, how it was once a place where ancient Hawaiians performed rituals, and how it was said to be a place of restless spirits. I don't know what we experienced those 2 nights. There's no logical explanation for it, at least none that I can think of. All I know is that we never went back to Mackenzie State Park, and I've warned everyone I know to think twice before camping there. Some places just aren't meant to be disturbed. I still can't explain exactly what happened that night. Every time I think about it, it sends a chill down my spine. It started off as just another random idea, something to shake up the usual boredom. My cousin and I decided we'd go camping. Nothing crazy, just a quick trip into the woods behind my house in Northeast Texas. We were about 15 years old then, and the woods weren't unfamiliar to us. We'd spent a lot of time out there as kids, exploring, building forts, and climbing trees. But that night, everything about the woods felt different. It was around late October, so the nights were starting to get colder. We packed light, a small 2-person tent, some blankets, a flashlight, snacks, and a portable DVD player to keep us entertained. The plan was simple: hike about half a mile in, set up the tent, and just hang out until morning. My parents didn't care. They knew where we were and we weren't far. It felt like an adventure without the actual risk of being too far from home. We got to our spot just before sunset. The trees were packed tightly together, but there was a small clearing where we could pitch the tent. The sky was a mix of deep oranges and purples as we worked. The sound of crickets chirping and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze made it feel peaceful, almost too quiet. Once the tent was up, we gathered some firewood and got a small fire going. We weren't great at it, but we managed to get it lit after a few tries. The fire crackled softly, casting long shadows into the woods. We roasted marshmallows, talked about school, and laughed about stupid stuff we'd done recently. The usual teenage nonsense. By the time the fire burned out, it was dark. So dark that the only light came from the stars and our flashlight. We crawled into the tent, wrapped up in blankets, and set up the DVD player. I don't even remember what movie we were watching. It didn't matter. It was sometime around midnight when it happened. At first, I thought it was just the wind picking up. The tent shifted slightly, and I could feel a faint pressure on the fabric, like something brushing against it. Then it got stronger. Something or someone was running around the tent. Fast. The first lap startled us, and we froze. The sound of heavy breathing followed, loud and raspy, like someone struggling to catch their breath. My cousin looked at me, his eyes wide in the glow of the DVD screen. Neither of us said a word. The running didn't stop. It just kept going. The tent walls pushed inward in different spots, like small hands pressing against it. First one side, then another, then all the way around. The pressure wasn't gentle. It was firm, deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was outside wanted us to know they were there. It felt chaotic, like there were several of them. The movements were too quick, too random for it to be just one person or animal. The top of the tent sagged slightly in places as the hands, if that's what they were, pushed down from above. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My throat felt tight, and my body wouldn't move. My cousin was just as frozen as I was. The sound of the breathing got louder, almost as if it was inside the tent with us. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal I could recognize either. It was deep, guttural, and wet, like someone trying to breathe through water. The running continued for what felt like forever, but couldn't have been more than a couple of minutes. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. The only sound was our own breathing, shallow and shaky. We didn't dare move. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear or a hog, but that didn't make sense. Bears don't run in circles around tents, and they definitely don't press on them with their paws like that. Hogs would have made more noise, grunting or snorting as they charged. This was something else entirely. We sat there paralyzed for hours. Every little noise, the creak of a branch, the rustle of leaves, made me jump. I kept waiting for it to come back, but it didn't. When the first light of dawn broke through the trees, we finally mustered the courage to unzip the tent and step outside. The clearing looked the same as it had the night before, but the ground around the tent was disturbed. There were no clear footprints, just a series of scuffs in the dirt and dead leaves, as if something had been moving rapidly around the tent. We didn't stick around to investigate further. We packed up as quickly as we could and headed back to the house without saying much. The walk felt longer than it should have, and every snap of a twig behind us made me glance over my shoulder. When we got back, my parents asked how the night went. I lied and said it was fine. I didn't want to explain what had happened because I didn't even know how to. To this day, I have no idea what was out there. I've gone over it 100 times in my head, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe it was a group of kids messing with us. But how would they have known we were there? And why would they be running around in the middle of the night in the woods? Maybe it was animals, but nothing about it felt like an animal. Whatever it was, I've never camped out there again. The woods behind my house don't feel the same anymore. During the day, they're just trees and dirt trails, but at night, they hold a kind of darkness I never noticed before. I don't know what we encountered that night, and I'm not sure I want to know. All I know is that I'll never forget the sound of that breathing or the way those hands pushed against the tent. It felt like something out of a nightmare, but it was real, too real, and that's what scares me the most.